The storm had torn through the coast all night long. Wind rattled the tall windows, rain pounded the slate roof, and thunder rolled so close it seemed the entire Hawthorne estate might crack apart. Somewhere in the endless hallways, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, leaving only shadows and the heavy pulse of silence. Maya Williams had been folding sheets in the laundry room, the rhythm of her work steady against the storm, when she felt something shift in her chest, a prickle, a warning. She couldn't explain it, only that she knew. She set the stack of linens aside and hurried down the corridor. Her shoes slapped against the marble, echoing in the dark. "Eli," she called. "Eli Hawthorne, are you all right?" No answer. Her heart quickened. She reached the boy's room at the far end of the east wing. The door stood slightly ajar, creaking with every gust of wind. Maya pushed it open and froze. There, on the polished floor beside his bed, lay 9-year-old Eli Hawthorne. His small chest rose in shallow, uneven jerks. His lips were pale, tinged with blue. One frail hand clawed weakly at the fabric of his pajama shirt, right over his heart. "Oh God, Eli," Maya whispered. She dropped to her knees beside him. His pulse, when she pressed trembling fingers to his neck, was faint, flickering like a candle about to go out. His eyes fluttered, half closed, lashes trembling as though he were fighting to stay awake. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please stay with me," Maya begged, her voice cracking as she lifted his fragile body into her arms. Outside, the thunder crashed again, shaking the glass panes. The whole mansion seemed to groan with the storm, and in Maya's chest, panic threatened to consume her. She had seen this before, the gasping, the weak pulse, the terrible color flooding a child's lips. A memory she fought to bury was clawing its way back up. But there was no time for memory, only action. She staggered out of the boy's room, carrying him, shouting down the wide corridor. "Help! Someone help me! Eli's not breathing right." Her voice echoed off cold marble and high ceilings, bouncing back at her like a cruel joke. At the end of the hallway, 2 figures appeared. Connie, the housekeeper, with her starched apron, and Jerome, the groundskeeper, still in his muddy boots. They turned toward her slowly, blinking in the dim glow of the emergency candles. Maya rushed closer, clutching Eli tight. "Please, he's in trouble. His heart, he needs a hospital now." Connie's eyes narrowed, expression flat as stone. "That's not our responsibility." Maya's breath caught. "Not your responsibility? He's dying in my arms." Jerome crossed his arms, his voice heavy with irritation. "He's not our problem. You're the one always fussing over him." Maya's throat burned. "Fussing? Look at him." She held the boy out, his limp head resting against her shoulder, his lips gray. "He could die." Connie's reply was icy. "Then call Mr. Hawthorne. It's his son, not ours." Maya let out a choked laugh, almost hysterical. "Call? The storm knocked out the lines? The power's gone? There's no signal." But they just stood there unmoving, 2 shadows in a house full of wealth and emptiness. Maya's mind screamed at her. No one will help. If she waited for orders, Eli Hawthorne would be gone before sunrise. She turned and ran, her shoes slipping on the polished floor. Past the silent portrait staring down from the walls, past locked doors and heavy curtains. Her arms ached under the boy's slight weight, but she gripped him tighter. "Hold on, Eli. Hold on for me." The mansion felt endless. Every hallway another stretch of darkness. Every turn another reminder that she was alone in this battle. At the foot of the grand staircase, Maya stopped for just a breath, panting, clutching the boy close. The storm rattled the chandelier overhead, glass trembling like it too might fall. She looked down at Eli Hawthorne. His small body was so light in her arms, too light, as though life itself were slipping out of him. His head lolled against her shoulder, his lips parted, a soft wheeze the only proof he was still here. And in that moment, like lightning flashing across her mind, another face appeared. A hospital room years ago. A pale boy with the same lips turning blue, the same chest struggling for breath. Her son, Tyler. "No," she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Not again. Not this time. The image burned hot in her memory. Tyler's last night, the frantic calls for a nurse, the paperwork delays, the helpless waiting. She had stood powerless, watching her own child slip away. And when his tiny chest had stilled, a part of her had died too. But Eli was here now, breathing however faintly, still fighting. Maya's arms tightened around him. I lost one son, Eli. I will not lose you. The decision ignited in her like fire. She wasn't going to beg useless staff or wait for permission. She would break every rule in that house, every lock, every line of loyalty, because a child's life mattered more. She shifted him in her arms, wrapped him tighter in the blanket she carried, and ran toward the east wing, where the forbidden study loomed. Thunder roared above, lightning lit the long hallway, and Maya Williams' footsteps rang sharp on the marble as she carried the boy deeper into the storm. The great Hawthorne estate loomed like a fortress against the storm, its tall iron gates and sprawling wings swallowed by rain and darkness. Maya Williams clutched Eli Hawthorne against her chest, his fragile body wrapped in the blanket she had torn from his bed. His skin was clammy, his breath shallow, each one a desperate gasp that sent panic rattling through her ribs. She staggered through the east corridor, heart pounding. The air was heavy with the scent of candle wax and damp stone, the storm groaning through every window pane. Behind her, she could still hear the echo of Connie's cold words. Not our responsibility. Not our responsibility. The phrase stung like a curse. If not theirs, then whose? This boy, this frail, gasping child, belonged to no one in that moment but her. Maya pressed her cheek to the top of Eli's head. Stay with me, sweetheart. I've got you. I won't let you go. The forbidden study loomed at the end of the hallway, its oak door locked tight. Maya didn't hesitate. With a trembling hand, she pulled the small fruit knife from her apron pocket, jammed it into the lock, twisted hard. A sharp click broke the silence, and the door gave way. The room smelled of leather, cologne, and wealth. Gleaming shelves lined the walls, the desk heavy and polished. She didn't pause. She pulled open the wall panel she had once glimpsed while dusting. There behind it, the safe, unlocked. Bundles of $100 bills stared back at her. She grabbed a thick roll without thinking, shoving it into her pocket. She wasn't stealing. She was paying the toll that survival demanded. And then, the shrill wail of the security alarm split the silence. Red lights flared in the corners, flashing like judgment. Maya didn't flinch. She snatched the Tesla key fob from the desk, tightened her grip on Eli, and bolted through the side door that led to the garage. The mansion howled with sirens as she flung herself into the driver's seat. Eli whimpered, the faint sound piercing through the storm. Maya buckled him in with shaking hands, whispering over and over, "Hold on, baby, hold on." She slammed her foot on the accelerator. The garage door creaked upward, lightning slashing the sky beyond. With one last glance at the towering mansion, a prison of wealth and neglect, she tore out into the rain. The Tesla roared down the long, winding drive, tires spitting up gravel and water as the storm swallowed her whole. Sheets of rain hammered the windshield, the wipers thrashing furiously, barely keeping pace. The road ahead was a blur of silver streaks and ghostly trees bent under the wind's assault. Maya's knuckles were white on the wheel. Her heart thudded like a drum, every beat screaming, "Faster, faster." Beside her, Eli's small head lolled against the seatbelt. His breath came in ragged pulls, faint whimpers slipping past his lips. She reached across, one hand gripping the wheel, the other brushing his damp hair back. "I'm here, Eli Hawthorne. I'm right here," she whispered. The storm raged around her, thunder shaking the ground, lightning splitting the sky into blinding shards. The tires hissed over puddles, the car skidding once, twice before Maya corrected, her chest heaving with fear. Images stabbed her mind. Tyler's hospital bed, his lips turning blue, her helpless hands pressing the call button again and again while nurses shuffled papers. Waiting. Always waiting. Not this time. Maya's jaw clenched. Her tears blurred the storm outside, but she pressed the pedal harder. The Tesla surged forward, its electric engine humming like a beast against the howl of the wind. Every mile felt like a lifetime. Every curve in the road threatened to steal the boy from her arms. She prayed in whispers, fragments of words slipping through her lips. Please, God, not again. Not him, too. The city lights flickered faint in the distance, a hazy promise beyond the storm. Almost there, baby, Maya murmured. Almost there. Eli stirred faintly, his lips trembling. His voice was just a whisper. Maya. Her throat clenched. He knew her name. Even in this haze of pain, he reached for her. Yes, sweetheart. I'm here. Don't let go. The tires screeched as she took the exit toward Mercy Hills Hospital. A green sign loomed through the rain, salvation painted in reflective letters. She flew down the final stretch, her heart in her throat, her whole body burning with desperation. The emergency bay blazed with fluorescent light, cutting through the storm like a beacon. Maya swung the car into the roundabout, brakes screaming as she stopped right at the entrance. She leapt out, rain soaking her instantly, hair plastered to her face. She yanked open the passenger door, scooped Eli into her arms, and ran. His small body felt like nothing and everything all at once, light as a feather, heavy as her own soul. Help! Please, help us! Maya cried, her voice raw against the storm. The sliding doors hissed open, and nurses rushed forward. Their eyes widened at the sight of the boy's color, the faint pulse at his throat. A gurney appeared from nowhere. Hands lifted him gently, swiftly, and rolled him down the corridor. Maya followed, stumbling, breathless. Her clothes clung to her, soaked through, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the sound of medical voices. Arrhythmia, code blue, get cardiology now, and the knowledge that Eli Hawthorne was in the hands of people who could fight for him. She had done it. She had gotten him here. For one heartbeat, relief flooded her veins. She pressed trembling hands to her face, whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Ma'am. The word cut like a blade. Maya turned. Two police officers stood in the corridor, their uniforms dark with rain, their expressions hard. One held out his hand. Maya Williams, you're under arrest for theft, unlawful entry, and unauthorized use of a vehicle. Turn around. Her breath shattered. No, you don't understand. I was saving him. The officer's hands were firm, cold, pulling her wrist behind her back. The metallic snap of the cuffs echoed like thunder in the sterile hallway. Maya's eyes burned as she looked past them, down the corridor where Eli disappeared on the gurney. Nurses bent over him, machines beeped, voices called orders. She cried out, desperate. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't. Please, he needs me. The officers began to lead her away. Her wet shoes squeaked on the tile. Her soaked clothes clung like chains. Her chest heaved, her wrists ached. Behind her, the last thing she heard before the hospital doors swung shut was the faint, wavering voice of Eli Hawthorne calling out in the chaos. Maya! The name echoed through her like a knife and a lifeline, both at once. The storm still raged outside, rain splattering the patrol car's windows as they pushed her inside. Red and blue lights flashed across her face, painting her not as a savior, but as a criminal. And as the car pulled away from Mercy Hills Hospital, Maya Williams whispered into the rain-streaked glass, I saved him. I saved him. The steel bit into her wrist with a sound that echoed louder in her chest than in the hallway. Click, click. And suddenly Maya Williams was no longer a rescuer, but a prisoner. The weight of the cuffs was heavier than the storm outside, heavier than the wet clothes clinging to her skin. Her arms were pulled tight behind her back, the metal biting into bone with every step. The officer's hands were firm on her elbows, steering her like a criminal through the white corridors of Mercy Hills Hospital. Behind them, down the corridor, the voices of the nurses blurred into static. Monitors beeping, orders shouted, the squeak of sneakers on tile. And through all of it came one sound that cut her deeper than any accusation. Maya! It was Eli Hawthorne. His voice was faint, but it reached her like a rope thrown to someone drowning. She turned her head, desperate for one more glimpse. Through the open doorway of the emergency room, she caught the sight of him. Small, pale, wires already on his chest, his eyes half-lidded, but searching for her. "I'm here," she cried, twisting against the officer's grip. "Eli, I'm here." One of the officers shoved her forward. "That's enough." "No!" Maya's voice cracked, breaking under the weight of the cuffs. "Don't let him be alone. Please, he called my name. He needs me." But the doors swung shut, cutting her off, silencing the fragile thread that bound her to the boy she had carried through the storm. And in that silence, the handcuffs seemed to grow colder still. The rain still hammered the city as they led her out of the hospital. The patrol car's red and blue lights painted the wet pavement in jagged colors, reflections stretching across puddles like broken glass. They opened the back door, pushed her inside. The leather seat was slick with water, her soaked clothes sticking, her wrists twisted awkwardly against the metal. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, and suddenly she was sealed away. From Eli, from the nurses, from the fight she had just won and immediately lost. The car rolled forward. The storm outside blurred into rivers across the windows. Street lamps flashed by in streaks, their lights stuttering over her face. And for the first time in years, Maya Williams spoke to herself out loud. "You saved him." Her voice was a whisper, rough and trembling. "You got him there in time. That's what matters." The officer in the passenger seat didn't look back. The driver said nothing. To them, she was just another case file, another booking, another name to add to a report. She leaned her forehead against the glass, the cold seeping into her skin. "They'll never believe me," she whispered. "Not Richard Hawthorne, not his lawyers, not the people who see me as nothing but the help." Her reflection in the rain-streaked window was ghostly, pale, eyes hollow with exhaustion. And behind that reflection, her memory conjured another face. Tyler, her son years ago, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms. The same gray tint to his lips, the same fluttering breath. She had begged then too, begged strangers in white coats to hurry, to please do something, but no one had moved fast enough. And she had walked out of that hospital with empty arms. "Not this time," Maya said, her voice firmer, cutting through the hum of the engine. "Not this time." Her wrists throbbed against the cuffs, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was still here, still fighting. And though the officers heard nothing but a criminal muttering in the back seat, Maya Williams knew she was saying the one thing that mattered most. Not to them, but to herself. The county precinct was small, a squat brick building that smelled of stale coffee and wet uniforms. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unfeeling. They processed her quickly. Fingerprints pressed onto cold glass, a photograph taken with her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes rimmed red from tears and rain. They removed her soaked jacket, searched her pockets. But in the breast pocket of her blouse, folded and worn from years of being carried close, they found the photograph. A boy with warm brown eyes, a smile too big for his face. Tyler. The officer glanced at it, frowned, then set it down on the desk without comment. Maya snatched it up as soon as her hands were free. They led her into the holding cell, a narrow room of concrete walls and a single metal bench bolted to the floor. The door clanged shut, the sound final, metallic, echoing through the empty corridor. Maya sat on the bench, her wrists still aching from the cuffs, though they were gone now. She unfolded the photo with trembling hands. Tyler's face smiled up at her, frozen in time, untouched by the sickness that had taken him. Her vision blurred. She pressed the photo to her chest, rocking slightly as the silence pressed in. "You'd be proud of me," she whispered. "I didn't freeze this time. I didn't wait. I carried him. I ran through the storm. I did what no one else would." Her voice cracked. The storm outside had quieted now, the precinct walls thick enough to block out the thunder. But inside her, the storm still raged. "I couldn't save you, Tyler," she said softly, her tears dropping onto the worn edges of the photo. "But I saved him, and I'll keep saving him, no matter what they say, no matter what they do to me. I won't let another child slip away while I stand still." The silence answered her, heavy but listening. Maya closed her eyes, clutching the photograph tight, and let her whispered promise fill the cell like a prayer. Outside, the storm finally broke, and inside, for the first time since the cuffs closed on her wrists, Maya Williams allowed herself to believe that she hadn't lost everything. Not yet. The interrogation room was colder than the cell. The walls were bare, painted in a shade of gray that looked as though it had absorbed every desperate story ever told inside them. A single bulb hummed overhead, casting a pale circle of light onto the scarred metal table. Maya Williams sat in a hard chair, her back straight, her hands folded together to keep them from trembling. The photograph of Tyler was gone, taken when they searched her again. And without it, she felt strangely exposed, as though her skin itself had been peeled away. The door opened. A man in a cheap suit walked in, a clipboard tucked under his arm. His tie was crooked, his eyes flat, his expression mechanical. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat across from her, clicked his pen, and began. Name: Maya Williams. Age: 34. Place of employment: the Hawthorne Estate. Hired as domestic staff 4 weeks ago. The man's eyes flicked up, briefly assessing her, then dropped back to the clipboard. His tone never changed, each question falling like a stone into water. Did you break into Mr. Richard Hawthorne's private office? Yes. Did you remove currency from a safe inside that office? Yes. Did you then remove Mr. Hawthorne's minor son, Eli Hawthorne, from the estate grounds without authorization? Yes. Each yes scraped her throat raw, but she didn't flinch. She would not lie. She had lied once, years ago, when Tyler was sick. Told him everything would be fine when deep down she knew it wasn't. She would not make that mistake again. The man's pen scratched across the page. He didn't look at her. He didn't care about the tremor in her voice, the way her wet clothes still clung to her skin, the exhaustion carved into her face. He asked questions. She answered. Why did you enter the office? Because the boy was dying. Why did you take the money? To pay for the only thing that mattered: time. Why did you drive him away from the estate? Because if I didn't, he wouldn't be breathing right now. The man scribbled something without looking up. So you admit to theft, trespassing, and kidnapping? Maya's head snapped up, her voice cutting through the cold. I admit to saving a child when no one else would. That finally drew his eyes to hers. They were blank, disinterested. He clicked his pen again, set it down, and stood. That's all for now. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, leaving Maya alone in the humming silence. The silence stretched. Long minutes ticked by, measured only by the faint buzz of the light above. Maya leaned forward, her arms resting on the table, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't the cheap-suited investigator. A man stepped in slowly, deliberately. His hair was silver at the temples, his suit wrinkled not from carelessness, but from long hours. His face carried the weight of years. Not cruel years, but tired ones. His badge gleamed faintly from his belt. Detective Carl Evans. He closed the door gently behind him, as though the act of shutting it should not feel like a sentence. Then he sat across from her, folding his hands loosely, not rushing. Miss Williams, he said, his voice low and steady. I've read the report. Maya said nothing. Her throat was too tight. Evans studied her for a long moment. His eyes weren't flat like the investigators. They were sharp but not unkind. Eyes that had seen too much, yet still tried to see. Tell me, he said at last, your version. Her lips parted, then closed again. No one had asked her that. Not the staff in the mansion, not the police in the hospital, not the clipboard man with his dry voice. They asked questions, demanded admissions, but no one had asked for her story. She swallowed hard. I was doing laundry, she began. Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. I went to check on Eli Hawthorne. I found him collapsed on the floor. He wasn't breathing right. His lips were turning blue. She saw the memory again, fresh and raw, and forced herself to continue. I ran for help. The housekeeper, the groundskeeper. They wouldn't move. They told me it wasn't their responsibility. Phones were dead. Power was gone. I knew there wasn't time, so I broke into the office. I took the money, I took the car, and I drove him through the storm until I got to the ER. Evans didn't write anything. He didn't even reach for a pen. He just watched her, his expression unreadable but not cruel. "You admit all that," he said finally. "Yes." He nodded slowly, leaning back. "And why?" Maya's eyes filled, but she held his gaze. "Because I lost a child once. My son, Tyler. Same gray lips, same shallow breaths. I waited then. I believed the system would act, but it didn't, and he died. I wasn't going to let that happen again. Not if I had arms to carry him, not if I had breath left to run." Evans's jaw tightened, a flicker of something crossing his face, something that looked like memory or maybe understanding. For a long time, Evans said nothing. The silence was heavier now, but different. Not the sterile silence of judgment, but the quiet weight of consideration. Finally, he leaned forward, his elbows on the table. His voice was low, deliberate. "You did what most wouldn't have done, Miss Williams." Maya blinked. Her breath caught. No one had said that to her. Not since the storm. Not since she'd been shoved into the back of the patrol car. "They'll tell you you're reckless," Evans continued, his tone steady. "They'll say you crossed lines, broke laws. But the truth is," he paused, searching for the right words. "The truth is, most people would have stayed frozen. They would have waited for permission, for orders, for backup that wasn't coming. And the boy would have been dead." Maya's hands trembled in her lap. She whispered, almost afraid to believe it, "You believe me." Evans didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just held her gaze. "I believe the boy's alive because you carried him through the storm. That much nobody can deny." Her eyes burned. For the first time in days, her chest loosened, just slightly, as though she could breathe again. But then Evans's voice hardened, the weight returning. "Still, Hawthorne is powerful. His lawyers will twist this every way they can. And Janelle," he let the name hang in the air like smoke, "she's already feeding them a story. They'll paint you as obsessed, dangerous. They'll make you the villain because it's easier than admitting their failure." Maya closed her eyes, Tyler's face flashing in her memory, Eli's voice calling her name in the ER. "I can't stop them," she whispered, "but I won't regret what I did. Not ever." Evans leaned back, watching her in the dim light. Then quietly he gathered his coat, rose to his feet, and moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused. "You did what others wouldn't have done," he said again. "Don't forget that." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Maya Williams alone at the table, but no longer quite as invisible. For the first time since the cuffs snapped shut, she felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close, something alive. The courthouse smelled of rain-soaked coats and old wood polish. The storm had passed, but its echoes seemed to linger in the marble floors and echoing hallways. Outside, a crowd pressed against the barriers. Journalists with cameras raised, microphones stretched, flashes bursting like sudden lightning. "Maya Williams," voices shouted as she was led up the steps in handcuffs. "Did you steal from Richard Hawthorne? Were you obsessed with his son? Were you after money?" The questions came like bullets, rapid, sharp, uncaring. The officers on either side of her tightened their grip, steering her through the shouting sea. But Maya felt every word pierce her skin. Inside, the courtroom was no less suffocating. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of reporters, their pens poised, their phones already glowing with live updates. The air buzzed with anticipation, not justice, but spectacle. Maya sat at the defense table, hands folded in her lap, wrists red from the cuffs that had only just been removed. Beside her, Claire Dorsey, the public defender with steel in her spine, whispered, "Keep your eyes forward. Don't let them see you break." Maya nodded faintly, though her throat was dry. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, not seeing her as a woman, but as a headline. The bailiff called the case. The words echoed, "State versus Maya Williams." And the trial, her trial for saving a life, began. The prosecution wasted no time. A young assistant district attorney rose, Sleek in a gray suit, his voice smooth but sharp. He painted a picture of intrusion, theft, and recklessness. The defendant unlawfully entered a private study, stole cash, and removed a child without consent, endangering his fragile health in the process. Then came the witness, Janelle. She swept into the courtroom like a queen entering her throne room. Immaculate hair, diamond earrings catching the light, her expression dripping disdain. She took the stand with the poise of someone used to being admired, not questioned. Her voice was calm, almost bored as she spoke. Maya Williams has been fixated on Eli Hawthorne since the day she arrived, always hovering, watching, pretending it was concern, but it was obsession. Maya's chest tightened. She manipulated her way into his life, Janelle continued, eyes cutting across the courtroom toward Maya. And when the moment came, she staged this entire drama, breaking into Richard's study, stealing money, taking Eli as though he were her own. This was never about saving him. It was about inserting herself into our lives. A murmur rippled through the benches. Pens scratched. Reporters exchanged quick glances, already forming their stories. Claire rose to cross-examine, her tone sharp but controlled. Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, Janelle corrected smoothly, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Miss Whitmore, you claim Maya Williams staged this. Yet the hospital's chief cardiologist confirmed that without her immediate action, Eli Hawthorne would not have survived. Are you suggesting the doctors are mistaken? Janelle's smile flickered for just a fraction of a second. I'm suggesting Maya Williams took unnecessary risks with a child's life. Risks no one authorized her to take. And that kind of recklessness isn't heroism. It's dangerous obsession. Maya's nails dug into her palms. Every word was poison, dripping into the ears of the jury, the press, the judge. And she had no voice to defend herself. Not yet. When it was her turn, Claire advised her not to testify. Not today. Not yet. They want to twist your words, use your grief against you. Sometimes silence is stronger. So Maya Williams sat quietly at the defense table as the accusations piled higher. Theft, manipulation, obsession. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, with note-taking, with judgment. But when Janelle stepped down from the witness stand, her diamond earrings catching the light, she passed close enough to lock eyes with Maya, and Maya looked up. Her gaze didn't waver, didn't drop. Her eyes, dark with exhaustion and grief, met Janelle's polished indifference and burned through it. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Every line of her face, every tight breath, every ounce of unspoken fury carried more weight than words ever could. For one heartbeat, Janelle faltered. She turned her head too quickly, heels clicking sharp on the polished floor as she walked back to Richard Hawthorne's side. Richard didn't meet Maya's eyes. His jaw was tight, his stare fixed on the papers in front of him, as though words on a page could erase the truth he didn't want to see. The gavel struck, calling the session to a close. The reporters surged to their feet, questions already flying. Maya stood slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't answer. She walked out in silence, her gaze steady, her back straight, her heart pounding with the one truth no accusation could erase. Eli Hawthorne had lived. And if her silence was all she had left, then silence would be her weapon. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a theater after a tragedy. Reporters swarmed outside, their voices muffled by the heavy oak doors. Inside, the air hung thick with judgment. Maya Williams sat on the hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, wrists clasped together tightly in her lap. Claire Dorsey, her lawyer, shuffled papers into a neat stack, her jaw clenched, her eyes sharp. They've poisoned the room, Claire muttered. Janelle's testimony hit its mark, but we're not out of ammunition. Maya lifted her gaze, heavy, weary. What do we have? Claire paused. And then, as though the universe itself had grown impatient with despair, the answer walked in. Valerie, the nurse from Mercy Hills Hospital. Still in scrubs, her hair pulled back in a rushed bun, exhaustion written across her face. But her eyes were alive, fierce. She came straight to Claire, then to Maya. I'll testify. she said without hesitation. Maya blinked, her breath caught. Why? Why would you risk that? Valerie's expression softened, but her voice carried steel. Because I saw what you did. I saw you run in with Eli Hawthorne in your arms, soaked to the bone, begging for help. I saw the way you held him like he was your own. And I saw Richard Hawthorne dismiss you, as if saving his son's life was an inconvenience. Her throat tightened. That didn't sit right with me. It never will. Maya's lips parted, but no sound came. She had no words, only the sudden, almost unbearable weight of gratitude pressing against her ribs. You're not alone, Miss Williams, Valerie said firmly. Not anymore. For the first time since the cuffs had closed around her wrists, Maya felt something shift, a thread of light piercing through the walls. That evening, after the courthouse emptied and the corridors dimmed, Maya was escorted back toward Holding. The hallways were quieter now, echoing only with the squeak of boots and the hum of fluorescent lights. But waiting for her in the visitor's room, against all odds, was Esther. Esther, the older housekeeper who had trained her on her first days at the Hawthorne estate. A woman who had endured the mansion's cold walls long before Maya arrived. Her frame was sturdy, her hair silver-threaded, her eyes carrying decades of both sorrow and strength. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She walked straight up to Maya, took her cuffed hands in her own, and held them tight. I saw the news, Esther whispered. And I knew. I knew it couldn't be true. They're twisting it, making you out like some thief, some schemer. But I've watched you. I've watched the way you cared for that boy when no one else would. You're not crazy. You're not obsessed. You're the only one who ever saw him. Maya's vision blurred. She lowered her head, her voice breaking. They're painting me as a monster, Esther. As if saving him was some kind of crime. Esther squeezed tighter, her voice low but strong. People like us, child. When we stand between the powerful and their shame, they'd rather bury us than face the truth. Don't you let them. You already won the only battle that mattered. That boy is alive. Maya's chest trembled. For a moment, she was not a defendant, not a name on a docket, not a woman pressed beneath the weight of money and influence. For a moment, she was simply Maya, a mother who had tried, and another woman was telling her it mattered. Esther reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a laminated photograph. She pressed it into Maya's hand. It was Tyler, her son, the same picture she had once shown Esther on a quiet night in the kitchen. I kept this, Esther said softly. I knew one day you'd need it again. You carry him with you, Maya, and you let him remind you. You're not finished yet. Maya closed her fingers around the photograph, the edges digging into her palm. Tears spilled freely, hot and unashamed. Thank you, she whispered. No, Esther said firmly. Don't thank me. Just keep standing. That night back in the narrow cell, the walls didn't feel quite as suffocating. The metal bench was still cold, the air still stale, but there was something else, a warmth that came not from the fluorescent lights, but from the voices that had reached her. She sat cross-legged on the bench, the photograph of Tyler clutched in her hands. She traced the edges with her thumb, whispering to him as if he could hear her through time and distance. Today I met people who believed me, she said softly. A nurse who saw, an old friend who remembered. Tyler, maybe I'm not as invisible as they want me to be. Maybe someone finally sees. Her words faltered. The silence filled in around them. From the far end of the corridor, another woman's voice drifted faintly from a neighboring cell. A whisper, almost a lullaby. You're not alone, honey, the stranger murmured. They can lock doors, but they can't lock hearts. Don't forget that. Maya froze, her breath catching. She didn't know who the voice belonged to. Another inmate, another soul pressed beneath the same weight. But the words slid into her like a balm. She pressed Tyler's photo to her chest and lay back against the wall, eyes closing slowly. For the first time since the storm, the cell didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a pause, a breath, a waiting place. Maya Williams let her head rest against the concrete and whispered into the night, I'm not alone. And for once, the silence whispered back, not empty, but alive. The cell was quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed in her bones. Night had settled heavy over the precinct, the halls echoing only with the occasional rattle of keys or the shuffle of boots. Maya Williams sat on the cold bench, Tyler's photograph cupped in her hands, whispering a prayer she no longer believed anyone was listening to. Then the guard appeared, his shadow stretching across the floor. He slid a small, battered phone onto the table inside the cell. "One call came through for you," he muttered. "Untraceable number. You've got 3 minutes." Maya blinked, stunned. Who would call her? Who even knew how? Her hands shook as she lifted the receiver. Static hissed. Then, "Maya?" Her breath caught. The voice was soft, trembling, unmistakable. "Eli?" On the other end of the line, the boy exhaled in relief. "Yeah, it's me." Maya's back pressed against the wall, her knees weakening. "Oh, baby. Oh, Eli Hawthorne. How are you calling me?" "The nurse helped," he whispered quickly, his words tumbling over one another. "Janelle left the room for a little while. The nurse said I had 3 minutes. Just 3. So I had to hear your voice." Maya pressed her palm over her mouth, choking back a sob. His voice, thin but steady, traveled through the static like light through cracks in a wall. "Maya," Eli whispered again, his small voice carrying urgency. "I told Daddy. I told him you saved me." Maya froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What did he say?" she breathed. There was a pause. On the other end, Eli's breath hitched. He didn't say much. He just got quiet. I think he's confused. But I told him anyway. I said, Maya saved me when nobody else would. I wanted him to know." Tears slid hot down Maya's cheeks. She pressed her forehead against the cold cinder block wall, holding the phone like it was lifeline and anchor all at once. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling, "that's the bravest thing you could have done." "I miss you," Eli blurted suddenly, his words breaking under the weight of his small, desperate heart. "The room feels so empty without you. Janelle she doesn't talk to me like you do. She acts like I'm in the way. But you held my hand when it hurt. You listened when I was scared." Maya closed her eyes. Tyler's memory flickered behind her lids, his small hands slipping away as monitors beeped flat. She couldn't save her son. But this boy, this fragile boy on the other end of the line, she could still be there for him, even if the world tried to chain her silence. "You're not in the way, Eli," she whispered fiercely. "You are the whole reason I breathed that night, the whole reason I ran. Don't you ever forget that." There was another pause. Then his voice, small but filled with determination. "Promise me, Maya. Promise me you'll come back to me." Maya's throat ached with the weight of everything she wanted to say, everything the walls wouldn't allow. Her tears fell freely, her voice shaking as she pressed the words into the phone. "I promise, Eli Hawthorne, I will come back to you, no matter what it takes, no matter how many lies they tell. You are not alone, you hear me? You are not alone." On the other end, she heard him sniffle, then whisper, "Okay, I believe you." The guard shifted outside the bars, tapping his watch. Time was nearly up. "I have to go," Eli whispered hurriedly. "They're coming back. The nurse said if anyone finds out—" "Shh, it's okay, sunshine," Maya cut in softly, her voice breaking. "I'm so proud of you. Stay strong. And remember, I will always come back." Static swallowed his breathing, then the line went dead. Maya held the receiver to her ear long after the silence set in, as though if she stayed still enough, she might hear his heartbeat across the miles. Finally, the guard reached in, plucking the phone away. The cell fell quiet again, except for the sound of Maya's tears dripping softly onto the concrete floor. She curled back onto the bench, clutching Tyler's photograph in one hand and the ghost of Eli's voice in the other. For the first time, the walls of the cell didn't feel entirely like a prison. They felt like the space between two promises, one broken long ago and one still alive. And Maya Williams whispered into the dark, her voice fierce and certain, "I will return to you." Richard Hawthorne stood in his penthouse office, a world of glass and steel stretching endlessly beneath him. The city glittered in the dusk, a kingdom that was his, built on profit, power, and precision. But inside, the silence gnawed at him. On the desk lay a photograph of Eli Hawthorne, taken years before, when the boy was still small enough to fit in the crook of his father's arm. Richard's fingers lingered on the frame, but his jaw was set tight, his eyes cold, as though tenderness itself was a liability. He could still hear it, though. Eli's weak, trembling voice in the hospital, whispering through blue lips. Maya, Maya saved me. The words cut sharper than any boardroom betrayal. His son had called for a maid, not for him, not for the man who had given him everything money could buy. Richard turned from the photo sharply, pacing. The empire he'd built demanded something different of him. Not warmth, not humanity, but distance. He was Hawthorne, the man who never faltered, never yielded, never lost control. And yet, every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya Williams, dripping wet from the storm, clutching Eli like a mother might, her voice breaking as she demanded someone save him. That image had burned into him, an accusation that silence and wealth could never erase. Richard, Janelle's voice carried across the room like perfume, soft, honeyed, but edged with steel. She crossed the office with the grace of someone who knew she belonged in every room she entered. Draped in silk, diamonds catching the last light of day, she looked like an answer the world would approve of. But to Richard, she felt like a shadow. "You're brooding again," she teased, though her smile was tight. "Don't tell me you're still thinking about her." Richard said nothing, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Janelle's tone sharpened. "She broke into your study. She stole from you. And now she's parading around as some kind of savior. If you let that stand, what do you think the board will say? What do you think investors will think of a man who lets his staff humiliate him in public?" Richard's hands curled into fists. He wanted to argue, to say that Maya's actions had saved their son's life. But the words clung to his throat, choked by the weight of reputation, the endless cycle of perception and power. Janelle pressed closer, her eyes gleaming. "This is bigger than one boy's gratitude, Richard. This is about your name, your empire. If you don't shut her down, she'll become a symbol, and symbols destroy men like you." She placed a hand on his arm, her voice dropping to a whisper. "File the charges. Let the court bury her, and we'll never have to hear her name again." Her touch felt like ice. Richard swallowed hard, torn between the fire of his son's voice and the cold iron of expectation. Later that night, the storm outside had broken into a soft drizzle, streaking the penthouse windows with silver. Richard sat alone, nursing a glass of whiskey, the room dim but heavy with unspoken questions. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hawthorne," his assistant said, "the police report from earlier today is on your desk." Richard stared at the folder, untouched. He didn't need to read it. He already knew what it said. Maya Williams, breaking and entering, theft, endangerment. And yet, a quieter voice whispered through him. She saved him. She did what no one else dared to do. For a moment, he almost picked up the phone, almost called the precinct to withdraw the charges, almost let himself be the man Eli needed, not the one the world demanded. But then he heard Janelle's footsteps in the hallway, her heels striking like a metronome of judgment. He saw in his mind the headlines: "Billionaire forgives, maid who stole from him, weakness, scandal, a brand collapsing." He clenched his jaw, closed his eyes, and forced his hand back from the phone. The next morning, the charges remained. The court date advanced. Maya Williams still sat behind bars, and Richard Hawthorne, the man with two faces, stood at the edge of a choice he could not make. Between his son's fragile heart and his empire's cold survival, he stepped forward one moment, only to retreat the next. The city saw a titan of industry, firm and untouchable. But inside, Richard was already fractured, torn between love that softened him and fear that caged him. And as the rain cleared from the skyline, the battle within him only grew darker. The cell was silent. The world outside had gone on spinning, but in that narrow space, time pressed inward, heavy and suffocating. Maya Williams sat with Tyler's photograph resting in her palms, her thumb smoothing the edges as if the worn paper might dissolve into skin. And then, uninvited, unstoppable, the memories came back. She was no longer in a cell. She was in a hospital corridor years ago, the air sharp with disinfectant, the ceiling lights buzzing overhead. Tyler was 5, too young to know words like arrhythmia or oxygen saturation, but old enough to know pain. She remembered the way his small chest had risen unevenly, the way the monitor beeped in frantic rhythm beside him. She remembered leaning over his bed, whispering songs into his ear, pretending she believed he'd wake up smiling. "Mommy's right here," she had whispered again and again, clutching his fragile hand. But the nurses were distracted, paperwork piled on their desks. The doctors were debating protocols in the hallway, and Maya was stuck in the middle, screaming silently that time was running out. If someone had acted sooner, if someone had looked sooner, the memory burned. She could still feel his fingers slipping from hers, could still hear the flat line that broke her heart in half. That night replayed endlessly in her mind, each detail sharper than the last. The small blanket patterned with stars, the stuffed bear propped in the corner of the bed. Tyler's lips, faintly blue when the nurse brushed it off as probably fatigue. Maya had argued, she had begged, "Please, something is wrong." But the system moved like molasses, and Tyler's heart moved too fast, then too slow, then not at all. When the alarm screamed, when the room filled with bodies rushing too late, Maya was shoved aside. She stood in the corner, helpless, her voice drowned by commands and machines. And then it was over, just like that. She carried that night like chains around her wrists. The guilt had no end. She had promised to protect him, and she had failed. In the years since, every sound of a child coughing, every glimpse of a pale face in a crowd sent her spiraling back to that moment. And in Eli Hawthorne's fragile body, in his small gasp for air, she had seen Tyler again. The fear had slammed into her like a wave. Not again. Not again. Not again. That was why she had run through the storm, why she had broken locks and stolen keys and defied a world of rules built to suffocate the powerless. Because she knew the cost of waiting. She knew the price of silence, and she refused to pay it twice. Maya sat back against the cold cinder block wall, her body trembling as though the memories had drained the very strength from her. Tyler's photo pressed hard against her chest, the corners biting into her skin. Her whisper filled the empty space. "I couldn't save you, Tyler, but I swear, I will not let them take him. I will not let Eli slip away." The vow was like fire in her lungs. She thought of Janelle's accusing eyes, of Richard's silence, of the cold indifference of staff who had turned their backs on a child. And she thought of Eli, whispering her name on a hospital bed, holding her hand as if it were the only anchor he had. She had lost one son to negligence, to systems that stalled, to people who looked away. But she would not lose another. Not to money, not to pride, not to courts twisting truth into lies. Her tears slowed, her breathing steadied, and in the stillness, a quiet strength rose from the ashes of her grief. "They'll try to bury me," she whispered into the dark, "but I will not break. Not for them. Not this time." Her hand tightened around the photograph. Tyler's memory wasn't just her wound anymore. It was her weapon. And as the night pressed on, Maya Williams closed her eyes. Not in surrender, but in defiance, carrying both her son's silence and her own rising voice. She had already buried one child. She would not bury another. Detective Carl Evans leaned over the desk in the precinct's records room, the glow of a monitor casting sharp shadows across his lined face. His fingers tapped against the keyboard, searching, pulling, cross-checking. Hours of estate surveillance footage stretched before him, files numbered, dated, time-stamped. But there were gaps, not glitches, not accidents, deliberate erasures. He scrolled back to the night of the storm, the moment Maya Williams claimed she'd broken into the study. Camera 12, hallway east wing. A gap, 40 minutes gone, replaced by blank static. Camera 9, garage entry, deleted at 2:11 a.m., exactly when Maya had carried Eli toward the car. Evan sat back, exhaling slowly. He had seen it before. Wealth was a brush that painted over evidence, but digital paint always left streaks. He printed the system logs, the timestamps blinking like a pulse. Whoever deleted the files had done it manually, logging in with administrator credentials. Too precise to be an accident, too convenient to be coincidence. When Evans carried the file to Claire Dorsey later that morning, her eyes narrowed over the pages. "This is enough to raise suspicion of tampering," she said. "If a judge sees this, it undermines their entire case." Evans nodded grimly. The truth doesn't vanish. It just hides until someone drags it back into the light. At the Hawthorne estate, whispers spread like hairline fractures in marble. Connie, the housekeeper who once shrugged at Eli's suffering, now lingered longer at her cleaning duties, her eyes darting nervously whenever Eli's name came up. Jerome, the groundskeeper, avoided questions altogether, his usual gruffness hollowed by unease. They had all heard. Maya Williams in jail, accused of theft and obsession. But they had also heard what the nurse had said, what the boy himself had whispered when he woke. "Maya. Maya saved me." And those words worked their way through the staff like seeds of doubt. One evening in the servants' kitchen, Esther sat across from Connie. The older woman stirred her tea slowly, her eyes calm but sharp. "You saw it, didn't you?" Esther asked quietly. How sick the boy was, how no one moved. Connie shifted uncomfortably. "Not my responsibility. That's what I was told." "Not your responsibility?" Esther's voice hardened. "Since when is a child's breath not our responsibility?" Jerome muttered from the corner. "She made her choice. Ran with the boy, broke into the study, stole the car, and saved his life," Esther cut back. "Saved what you were too afraid to save." Connie's hand trembled against her teacup. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. The walls of silence, once thick as steel, were beginning to crack. Janelle's heels clicked across the marble floor of the penthouse living room as she poured herself another glass of wine. Richard Hawthorne sat by the window, silent, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "You're too quiet again," she said sharply, swirling the liquid in her glass. "I don't like it." Richard didn't answer. He rarely did when the storm inside him was louder than anything outside. Janelle set her glass down with a clink, her voice laced with irritation. "You keep hesitating, acting like that maid is anything more than a nuisance. She is nothing, Richard. Nothing." Still no answer. Richard's silence pressed against her words like resistance she couldn't see. And then, perhaps out of carelessness, perhaps out of the venom that had been building in her, Janelle muttered under her breath, "She was in the way from the start." Richard's head turned sharply. "What did you just say?" Janelle froze, realizing her slip, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. She straightened, her chin high. "I said she was in the way. Always hovering, always watching, always pretending she cared more than anyone else." Richard's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. For the first time, doubt flared openly between them. "She saved our son," he said, his voice low but dangerous. Janelle scoffed, masking her stumble with disdain. "Or she staged the whole thing. You think I don't see what she's doing? She's manipulating him. And you." But the words rang hollow now, echoing against the weight of her slip. Richard turned back to the window, but something in him had shifted. He no longer saw only the city lights. He saw cracks forming in the fortress he had built, cracks that whispered truths he had tried to bury. And in the silence that followed, Janelle realized she had said too much. The walls around them, once unbreakable, were beginning to crumble. The courthouse steps were a theater of chaos. Reporters jostled with microphones, cameras flashed, and the crowd hummed with speculation. Inside, however, the air was different this time. The first hearing had felt like a firing squad. Today felt like a gathering storm, and Maya Williams was not standing alone anymore. Claire Dorsey adjusted her files as they entered the courtroom. Her eyes scanned the benches where unexpected faces had gathered. Esther was there, hands folded, eyes burning with conviction. Valerie, the nurse from Mercy Hills, sat beside her, holding her chin high. Even a young teacher from Eli's school had come, lips pressed tight, ready to speak. When the judge entered, Silence fell heavy, broken only by the scrape of chairs. The prosecutor rose first, polished and sharp, rehearsing the same words: breaking and entering, theft, obsession. But the rhythm of his case faltered as Claire stood, her voice clear and deliberate. Your Honor, today we bring more than words. We bring witnesses who saw the truth with their own eyes. Valerie took the stand first. Her testimony cut through the courtroom like light through fog. I saw the boy's condition. He was fading. His heart was failing. Without Miss Williams, he wouldn't be here today. Then Esther. The old caretaker's voice was steady, seasoned by years of service in that house. The child was neglected. Staff were told to stay away, not to intervene. Maya Williams did what we all should have done. Finally, the teacher. She spoke of Eli's loneliness, his silence, and the way he had begun to speak Maya's name with a kind of desperate relief. He trusted her, the teacher said softly, because she listened when no one else did. The courtroom shifted. The murmurs from the benches were not the cynical whispers of before. They were notes of recognition, of empathy. Even the judge leaned forward. Pen paused above her notepad. Maya sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her heart beat with the rhythm of something new, the sound of walls beginning to fall. By the afternoon, headlines spilled across the news cycle. Nurse confirms Maya saved Eli. Caregiver testifies to neglect inside Hawthorne estate. The story, once painted in black and white strokes of villain and victim, now shimmered with shades of gray. On the courthouse lawn, clusters of supporters gathered. Some carried small signs scrawled with words like, "Justice for Maya and she saved him." Others simply stood in quiet solidarity, their presence louder than any slogan. Detective Evans watched from the edge of the crowd, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. He had seen public opinion turn before, but rarely so swiftly. Something about Maya's case carried a weight people couldn't ignore. The fragile image of a boy saved not by privilege, but by the courage of a woman the world had dismissed. Inside his penthouse, Richard Hawthorne scrolled through headlines on his tablet. His empire's advisors urged silence. His lawyers pressed harder. But every article, every video clip of the nurse's voice, carved deeper into his armor. And Janelle raged. She threw her glass against the wall, shards scattering across marble. "They're turning her into a saint," she hissed. "And you're just going to let it happen?" Richard said nothing. His silence was answer enough. For the first time, Maya Williams wasn't just a defendant in a courtroom. She was becoming a story. And stories, once released, had a way of moving hearts in ways power never could. That night, back in her cell, Maya sat on the narrow cot, the noise of the precinct a dull hum beyond the bars. In her hands, the photograph of Tyler glowed under the weak light bulb overhead. She traced his smile with her finger, the ache in her chest as sharp as ever. But something was different tonight. The guilt was still there, the grief still raw, but it wasn't the only thing inside her anymore. For the first time since the storm began, she felt breath move freely in her chest. Valerie had spoken. Esther had stood by her. Strangers outside had raised signs with her name. Tyler's memory was no longer chained to failure. It was rising into something else, something living. Maya closed her eyes, pressing the photo to her lips. And then, almost without realizing it, she smiled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was survival. A small, trembling smile born of the truth that she was not invisible anymore. Whispering into the quiet, she said, "We're still here, Tyler. We're still fighting. And I will not stop." The cell remained silent, the walls unchanged. But in that moment, Maya Williams felt her second wind. The storm had not passed, but she had found air to breathe again. And in that breath, there was strength. The study smelled faintly of leather and dust, the air heavy with silence. Richard Hawthorne stood at his desk, a glass of untouched scotch resting near his hand. He had just returned from the hospital, where Eli had proudly shown him a stack of drawings. Richard hadn't expected what he saw. On the first page, in shaky crayon lines, a boy and a woman stood hand in hand under a giant yellow sun. The woman's hair was dark, her smile wide. Beneath the drawing, scrawled in clumsy letters, Miss Maya and me. On another page, Eli had drawn a heart split in two halves, one side colored pale blue, the other bright red. On the red side, Maya stood, arms open. On the blue side, Richard himself was nowhere. Richard's throat tightened. He flipped through page after page, each one telling the same quiet truth. Maya Williams had been the center of his son's safety, the one figure who made him smile in a world that too often pressed silence onto his small shoulders. It unsettled him. More than unsettled, it shook something inside he had locked away long ago. He had built an empire of steel and glass, surrounded himself with advisors, caretakers, and walls thicker than stone. But in the fragile world of crayons and paper, his son had drawn a truth wealth could not hide. For the first time, Richard felt like a ghost in his own child's story. The boardroom gleamed with polished wood and bright lights, but the mood was tense. Around the long table sat men and women in tailored suits, their voices sharp, their eyes keenly watching Richard. One man cleared his throat. "Richard, the optics are becoming dangerous. This Maya Williams case is all over the news. It undermines our stability." Another woman leaned forward, her tone colder. "She is not just a scandal, Richard. She is a threat. A maid who breaks into your home, steals from you, then turns into a public martyr? If you don't control this, shareholders will panic." The words struck like hammers. Threat, martyr, control. Richard leaned back, fingers steepled, face unreadable. His silence had always been his weapon, but tonight it felt less like strength and more like a cage. "She's manipulating perception," another partner said sharply. "We've worked too hard to keep this company ironclad. The longer you hesitate, the more she erodes your credibility." Richard's jaw tightened. He wanted to push back, to say the words lodged in his throat. "She saved him. She saved my boy." But he didn't. Instead, he nodded stiffly, letting the conversation move forward. Inside, though, his thoughts burned. Were they right? Or were they blind in the same way he had been blind? Because when Eli whispered Maya's name, when the boy smiled for the first time in weeks, it had not been because of corporate partners or polished reputations. It had been because of her. And yet, here he was, nodding in silence, while they labeled her a threat. Late that night, Richard sat alone in the darkened study. The Scotch glass was still full, untouched. The city skyline glimmered outside the tall windows, but he didn't see it. His gaze lingered on the drawings spread across his desk, crayons bleeding truth onto paper. He remembered Eli's voice at the hospital, small, honest. "Daddy, Maya saved me." Those words pierced deeper than any boardroom rebuke, and now in the quiet, Richard's armor cracked. He had called the police. He had pressed charges. He had allowed Janelle's sharp whispers to paint Maya as dangerous. He had chosen pride over instinct, image over compassion. But what if he had been wrong? Richard lowered his head into his hands, his breath ragged. For a man used to power, the question itself was unbearable. Yet it gnawed at him, relentless. What if I let the only person who truly cared for my son be destroyed? The silence of the study was broken only by the faint rustle of the drawings when he lifted them again. One crumpled page showed Eli smiling with a red cape fluttering behind him, Maya standing at his side. No Richard, no Janelle. Only the two of them, under a bright sun that felt like hope. His hand trembled as he set it down. For the first time in years, Richard Hawthorne did not feel like the master of his empire. He felt like a father in the shadows of his own child's life, unsure if he had already lost what mattered most. And as dawn crept along the skyline, he whispered into the empty room, "What if I was wrong?" The words hung heavy, fragile, and unanswerable. But they were the first honest words he had spoken to himself in years. The courthouse had never felt so heavy. Every bench was full, the air humming with whispers, the walls themselves carrying the weight of expectation. Outside, cameras swarmed the steps, and headlines rolled in real time across digital feeds. Final day in Maya Williams' trial. Hawthorne case nears verdict. Maya Williams sat at the defense table, her wrists free of cuffs but her heart bound in iron. Claire Dorsey leaned close, her voice steady but low. Whatever happens, you tell your truth. Not what they want, not what you think will please the court. Just the truth. The judge entered, gavel striking once. The courtroom stilled. The prosecutor rose, sleek in a gray suit, eyes sharpened like blades. His voice rang loud and theatrical. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case about compassion. It is a case about boundaries, about order, about the line between right and wrong. Maya Williams crossed that line. He paced deliberately, letting each word drip with weight. She broke into her employer's private study. She stole over $20,000 in cash. She took a luxury vehicle without authorization. And yes, she transported a child in fragile health, without medical training, without consent, putting his life at further risk. That is recklessness. That is obsession. That is not heroism. He stopped, turning to the jury with a piercing gaze. If we excuse this, if we call it noble, then we set a precedent that chaos is acceptable. That employees may seize power when they feel justified. That rules do not matter. He spread his arms wide, voice rising. Richard Hawthorne built his life on order. His fortune, his reputation, his legacy, all jeopardized because one woman decided she knew better. Is that the example we want? That law bends to emotion? That rules crumble under sympathy? The courtroom was silent but tense. Some faces hardened, others softened with doubt. Maya sat motionless, her fingers curled tight against her lap. The prosecutor delivered his final blow, his voice cutting. Maya Williams is not a savior. She is a liability, and for the good of law and order, she must be held accountable. The air seemed to collapse around her. Claire squeezed her arm, then stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Maya Williams to the stand. Her legs trembled as she rose. The bailiff swore her in. She sat, the wooden chair colder than stone, the entire courtroom pressing in. Claire asked softly, Miss Williams, can you tell the court why you acted as you did that night? Maya's throat tightened. For days, for weeks, she had spoken of Eli. But she had not spoken of Tyler. Not here, not to strangers, not to a world that would weigh her words against her worth. Now, with everyone watching, she inhaled. My son, she began, her voice breaking, was named Tyler. The room hushed deeper, silence thick enough to shatter. He was small like Eli. He had a congenital heart defect. I sat by his bed night after night, waiting for the doctors to decide, for the system to move, for someone to act. And I lost him. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. That night, when I found Eli on the floor, gasping for air, I saw Tyler again. I saw what happens when you wait, when you trust that help will arrive. Phones were down. Staff refused to move. He was dying in front of me. She looked at the prosecutor then, her eyes burning. So I acted. I broke a lock. I took cash I didn't care about. I drove through a storm with a boy in my arms because I would not lose another child to silence. Not again. Not ever. Tears traced her cheeks. Call it theft. Call it obsession. Call it whatever you want. But I call it being human. And if that is a crime, then yes, I am guilty. The judge leaned forward, her face unreadable. In the benches, whispers rippled. Some choked sobs, some muttered disapproval. The story had cracked the air, pierced defenses, laid bare a grief too raw to dismiss. Claire let the silence linger. Then she whispered, no further questions. Maya lowered her head, her heart still pounding, her truth finally spoken aloud. The judge cleared her throat, tapping her gavel once for silence. Her eyes swept the courtroom, the lawyers, the jury, the crowd, and finally Maya. This court has heard arguments. We have seen evidence. We have listened to witnesses and to the accused herself. Her voice was steady, but her gaze heavy. This is not a case without complexity. It touches law, morality, and the fragile line between duty and compassion. She paused, the silence thick with tension. The verdict, the judge continued slowly, will be delivered tomorrow morning. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's lips pressed thin with irritation. Claire placed a steadying hand on Maya's shoulder, whispering, "This is good. It means she's thinking." But Maya barely heard. Her breath came shallow, her fingers clutching the edge of the table. Tomorrow, one more night in limbo, one more night in the gray space between freedom and ruin. The judge stood. "Court is adjourned." The gavel cracked once more, final and absolute. The room exploded into noise. Reporters rushing out, cameras flashing, supporters calling her name, critics muttering darkly. Through it all, Maya sat still, her photograph of Tyler hidden in her pocket, her truth finally spoken into the world. And in the quiet corner of her heart, she whispered to both boys, one lost, one saved. Tomorrow decides everything. The dawn crept into the holding cell like a reluctant guest. Pale light slipped through the narrow window, painting the walls in shades of ash. Maya Williams sat upright on the cot, her hands folded around the worn photograph she had carried like a lifeline. Tyler's face smiled back at her from the faded edges. A boy forever young, frozen in the snapshot of a life cut short. She traced the outline of his cheek with her thumb, her breath trembling. "Baby," she whispered, "I need you today. I need your strength." For weeks she had carried her grief like armor, silent and unspoken. But now on the morning of the verdict, the silence broke. She bowed her head, pressing the photograph to her lips. "I don't ask for miracles. I don't ask for victory. I just want the truth to matter. Just once. For Eli. For you. For me." Her chest heaved, the tears finally falling. The cold walls echoed her voice, but in her heart, she imagined Tyler listening. She imagined him close, his small hand over hers steadying her. When the guard came to escort her to the courtroom, Maya rose slowly, tucking the photo back into her pocket. Her hands no longer shook. Whatever the outcome, she would walk into that room not as the broken maid they painted her to be, but as a mother who had loved, fought, and refused to look away. The courtroom was standing room only. Reporters filled every bench, their pens poised like weapons. Supporters huddled in clusters, their signs tucked away, but their eyes fierce. The prosecution sat rigid, papers stacked like ammunition. Claire Dorsey at Maya's side whispered once, "Steady, breathe." The judge entered. One sharp strike of the gavel brought silence. "This court has reviewed testimony, evidence, and arguments," she began, her tone measured. "The case before us has stirred deep emotions, but we must rule by law." Maya's heartbeat thudded like a drum. "On the charges of child endangerment," the judge said firmly, "this court finds Maya Williams not guilty. Evidence shows her actions directly preserved the child's life." A gasp rippled across the benches. Valerie, seated among the supporters, covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. The judge continued, "On the charge of grand theft, this court considers the context. Though funds were taken without authorization, testimony confirmed they were used solely for emergency medical transport. The court dismisses this charge." The prosecutor's face blanched. A few reporters scribbled furiously. Maya's vision blurred, her chest tightening. Not guilty. Dismissed. The judge's eyes narrowed as she read the final count. "On the charge of unlawful entry, the court finds Maya Williams guilty." The words dropped like stones. A murmur spread. "However," the judge added, raising her hand, "given the extraordinary circumstances, the sentence is time served. Effective immediately, Maya Williams is released from custody." The gavel cracked once more. "This court is adjourned." The room erupted. Cheers and shouts mingled with outrage. Reporters rushing toward the exits to blast headlines into the world. Claire's hand clutched Maya's, her voice hushed but fierce. "You're free, Maya. You're free." Maya exhaled a ragged breath, tears sliding down her cheeks. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was freedom. Outside the courthouse, the air hit her like a wave. Cold, sharp, alive. The steps were flooded with cameras, microphones, and flashing bulbs. Voices shouted her name, questions hurled like stones. "Maya, are you the boy's real hero? Maya, will you sue the Hawthorne family? Maya, do you regret breaking the law?" She paused at the top of the stairs, Claire and Esther at her sides. The noise battered her. But she didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave or shout. Instead, she slipped her hand into her pocket and touched the photograph of Tyler. That was her answer. The crowd roared, divided between praise and condemnation. But Maya's steps were steady as she descended. The chains were gone. The bars behind her were closed. The sky above was open. At the bottom of the steps, Valerie embraced her tightly. Esther pressed her hands over Maya's. Claire smiled, tired but proud. And in the chaos of questions and cameras, Maya Williams whispered to herself, "I am not a winner. I am not a villain. I am free." The words were not meant for the reporters, not for Richard Hawthorne watching from a distant window, not for Janelle fuming in silence. They were for her son, the one she had lost and the one she had saved. She walked through the sea of people, her head high, her shoulders straight, not triumphant but unbroken. And in that quiet space inside her, she carried the truth. Freedom is not glory but breath. And at last she could breathe. The iron gates of the Hawthorne estate creaked open slowly, their heavy hinges groaning like old secrets. For weeks, Maya Williams had imagined this moment. Imagined it while pacing the cell floor, while clutching Tyler's photograph in court, while breathing freedom on courthouse steps. Now it was here. The gravel path stretched long and pristine, the mansion looming with its tall windows, like watchful eyes. But the air felt different, not cold and silent as before. There was movement inside, a hum, like a house holding its breath for change. Maya stepped through the entryway. Esther, waiting in the foyer, offered her a small, knowing smile. "He hasn't stopped asking for you. Since dawn." Maya nodded, her throat tightening. Her steps carried her toward the sunroom, where pale light spilled across the floor. And then she saw him. Eli Hawthorne sat curled on a chair, a blanket wrapped loosely around his shoulders, crayons scattered across the table. His thin frame seemed steadier, his eyes brighter. The moment he looked up, his face lit like sunrise. "Maya!" His voice rang clear, free of the rasp she remembered. He scrambled off the chair, the blanket tumbling to the floor, and ran straight into her arms. She dropped to her knees, gathering him close, her face pressed to his soft hair. His little hands clung to her neck, as though afraid she'd vanish again. "You came back," he whispered breathlessly. Maya's eyes stung. "I promised you I would." He pulled back just enough to search her face, his eyes brimming. They said maybe you couldn't. But I knew." She kissed his forehead, her voice breaking. "I'm here, Eli. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, nothing else existed. Not the trial, not the headlines, not the weight of the world pressing in. Only the heartbeat of a boy safe in her arms, and the quiet truth that love had carried her back to him. Later that afternoon, after Eli had drifted into a nap under the warm sunroom windows, Richard Hawthorne appeared. He stood in the doorway for a while, watching silently, his tall frame outlined by the golden light. He looked older than he had weeks ago, the lines deeper, the eyes shadowed not by arrogance but by regret. "Maya," he said softly. She turned, her arms still wrapped around the boy's blanket. "Mr. Hawthorne." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room felt smaller with him in it, the air heavier but not hostile, just fragile. "I want to say something," he began, his voice low, hesitant in a way she'd never heard. "I made mistakes, too many to count. I chose image over truth, silence over listening, and my son nearly paid the price." He paused, glancing at Eli's sleeping form. His voice cracked faintly. "You saved him, not just that night, but in all the ways I didn't. You saw him when I didn't." Maya stood still, her hands tight on the blanket. "I ended things with Janelle," Richard continued, his tone quiet but firm. "I've been looking at the staff, the systems here, the coldness I allowed to fester. I don't like the man I've been, and I don't want Eli to grow up with that man as his model." He finally met her gaze, his eyes stripped of the power plays and polished armor she had known. They were just eyes, tired, searching, raw. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to try, to rebuild, with honesty this time, for him." For myself. The silence between them was long. The ticking of a distant clock filled it, every second sharp. Maya drew in a steady breath. Richard Hawthorne, she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. You need to hear me clearly. He straightened slightly, bracing himself. I didn't come back for you. I didn't endure the trial, the chains, the whispers, just to stand here and give you comfort. I came back because of him. She gestured toward Eli, sleeping peacefully, his small hand curled near his face. Her voice deepened, fierce but tender. Every step I've taken has been for that boy, because he deserves love, presence, someone who will never turn away. That's why I'm here. Richard's lips parted, but he said nothing. His shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. Maya continued, softer now. If you want to change, if you want to be better for him, then do it. Not for me, not for appearances. For him, because he is the one who matters. Her hand brushed Eli's hair as she added, almost in a whisper, I lost my son once. I will not lose another. The silence that followed was not empty, but alive, charged with truth. Richard bowed his head slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. I understand, he said finally. Maya turned back to Eli, sitting beside him as the boy stirred and murmured her name in his sleep. She leaned close, whispering, I'm here, sunshine. Always. Richard remained by the door, watching. Not as the master of the house, not as the businessman who commanded boardrooms, but as a father trying to find his way back. And in that sunlit room, two worlds, wealth and humility, power and compassion, stood side by side, not reconciled, not healed, but meeting at last in the fragile space of a child's need. The late afternoon sun spilled through the tall glass panes of the Hawthorne sunroom, painting the polished floor in warm amber. Dust motes floated in lazy swirls, glowing like tiny sparks in the air. Maya Williams sat on the cushioned chair, her hands folded, watching as Eli hunched over a large sheet of paper spread across the table. His crayons lay scattered in every color imaginable, their wrappers worn, tips blunted from hours of use. The boy's tongue poked from the corner of his mouth as he concentrated, his small fingers gripping a bright yellow crayon. What are you making, sunshine? Maya asked softly, leaning forward. Eli's eyes flicked up, gleaming with mischief. It's a surprise. Don't look yet. Maya chuckled, covering her eyes playfully. All right. I'm not looking. She could hear the scratching of wax on paper, the occasional snap as Eli reached for another crayon, the hum of his quiet breathing. The sound carried her back to her own childhood, to nights when Tyler had sprawled on the living room rug with his own crayons, drawing dinosaurs and rocket ships. After a few minutes, Eli let out a triumphant sigh. Okay, you can look now. Maya lowered her hands and leaned forward. The drawing nearly stole her breath. On the paper, under a wide golden sun, three figures stood hand in hand. One was small, his hair scribbled brown, his smile wide and uneven. Next to him stood a taller figure with long dark hair and a gentle smile. Maya recognized herself instantly, her hand linked with his. And to the other side stood a man, tall, drawn in black crayon, his hand also joined to the boy's. Beneath them, in large uneven letters, Eli had scrawled, My family under the sun. Maya's chest tightened, her throat aching as tears blurred her sight. Eli beamed, holding the page out proudly. See? That's me, that's you, and that's Daddy. We're all together now. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the edge of the paper. It's beautiful, Eli. So beautiful. The boy grinned wider, his voice full of simple certainty. Now the sun shines on us all the time. Maya sat quietly, the drawing balanced across her lap, her eyes drinking in every uneven line, every bright color. She felt Eli crawl onto the chair beside her, his small shoulder pressing against hers, his eyes searching her face. Do you like it? He asked, his voice hushed, as if the drawing itself carried a secret. Maya's arm wrapped around him instinctively, pulling him closer. Eli, I don't just like it. I love it. He smiled, his head resting against her arm, already content. She looked down again, her tears falling silently onto the page, careful not to smudge the colors. For so long she had been weighed down by failure, by the memory of Tyler's small, fragile body slipping away, by the guilt of not acting fast enough, by the silence of a loss that had hollowed her out. But here, now, in this sunlit room with Eli warm at her side, she felt something stir, a release, a softening. She bent her head, her lips close to the boy's hair, and whispered words meant for him, for Tyler, for herself. Sometimes, sometimes saving one child is enough. The words trembled as they left her mouth, but once spoken, they rang true. She could not rewrite the past. She could not bring back the son she had lost. But she had saved Eli, and that was not nothing. It was everything. Eli stirred slightly, lifting his face to her. "What did you say?" Maya smiled through tears, brushing his hair from his forehead. "I said you're my sunshine, and I'm so proud of you." He grinned, satisfied with that answer, and nestled closer into her side. His breathing slowed, steady, calm. Maya held the drawing to her chest, her voice inside her heart whispering again. To Tyler this time. "I couldn't save you, baby, but I saved him. And in saving him, maybe I saved myself too." Across the room, silent until now, Richard Hawthorne stood near the doorway. He had been watching since Eli first pressed the yellow crayon to paper, his tall frame motionless, his eyes fixed not on the child's drawing, but on the faces of his son and the woman beside him. He saw the way Eli leaned against Maya, the way his small hand clutched her sleeve without hesitation, the way his entire body seemed to rest only when she was near. He saw how Maya's tears fell freely, unashamed. Her heart poured openly into every word, every touch. And Richard felt, for the first time in years, the weight of what he had missed. He had built empires, commanded boardrooms, silenced competitors. But in all his striving, he had overlooked the one thing his son truly needed: presence. Now he saw it laid bare in crayon and paper. His son's family was not built of wealth or power. It was built of love, drawn in bright colors under a sun that burned warmer than any fortune. Richard's throat tightened. His hands curled loosely at his sides, but there was no fight left in them, no armor, no shield, no defense. He was not the hero of this story. He was not the savior. He was simply a man who had almost lost everything, and who now, by grace, was given another chance to stand nearby and learn. Eli turned, catching sight of him at last. "Daddy, look! I drew us all together." Richard swallowed, stepping forward slowly. He crouched beside the chair, his eyes on the picture. "It's beautiful, Eli," he said softly, his voice nearly breaking. "You did a wonderful job." Eli's smile stretched wide. "Now we can all be happy." Maya glanced at Richard. Their eyes met, not in challenge this time, not in defiance, but in something quieter. His gaze was stripped of pride, stripped of pretense. For the first time, he looked not like a billionaire or a master of the house, but like a father, humbled, grateful, uncertain. And in that fragile space, the three of them sat together. The boy with his crayons, the woman who had saved him, the father who had nearly lost him. Not a perfect family, not healed, not whole, but held together, at least for that moment, under the warmth of a child's sun. The city evening was soft with autumn, the sidewalks scattered with amber leaves, the air carrying the faint scent of rain yet to fall. Maya Williams turned the key in her apartment door and stepped inside. The space was small, worn, familiar, nothing like the vast marble hallways of the Hawthorne estate, but it was hers. And tonight, for the first time in months, it did not feel empty. She set her bag down by the door, slipped off her shoes, and moved toward the narrow living room. The hum of traffic below blended with the occasional bark of a dog, the rhythm of neighbors laughing through thin walls. Life was happening all around her, ordinary and unremarkable. But to Maya, it felt like music. She made herself a cup of tea, chamomile, the way she used to brew it late at night when Tyler was small. The steam rose in thin spirals as she carried it to the window seat. She lowered herself onto the cushion, drawing her knees close, gazing out at the streetlights flickering awake one by one. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steadied. The long road of trials, whispers, and suspicion seemed distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was not fighting. She was simply being. On the small table beside her sat two things: a faded photograph of Tyler and the new drawing Eli had pressed into her hands that afternoon. Maya reached first for the photograph. The edges were bent from years of holding, the colors fading. Tyler's smile stared back at her, gap-toothed and bright. His eyes sparkled with a mischief that had always been his. She ran her thumb along the frame, her chest tightening with the familiar ache of loss. "I miss you, baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Every single day." Then her gaze shifted to the drawing. Eli's crayon strokes burst with life, a sun beaming above, three figures holding hands, their smiles wide and sure. "My family under the sun," the caption read in uneven letters. Maya lifted the paper carefully, holding it beside the photograph. One boy gone, another saved, two worlds colliding in her hands, grief and hope, memory and renewal. Her tears blurred the lines until both images seemed to merge. Tyler's laughter, Eli's shy grin, the son she had lost, the boy she had found. She pressed them both to her chest, rocking slightly, whispering into the quiet, "I couldn't save you, Tyler, but because of you, I knew how to save him. And he drew us together today. Me, him, even his father. Under the sun. Do you see? It's not perfect, but it's something." Her words trembled, carried by the silence. Yet for the first time, they did not feel like a plea. They felt like truth. The city lights outside glowed brighter, as though the world itself were listening. Maya leaned back against the window frame, the tea cooling at her side, the photograph and drawing still warm against her chest. She closed her eyes, allowing the hum of the city to settle over her like a blanket. Her journey had not ended in a fairy tale. She was not suddenly wealthy, not universally adored. There were still whispers, doubts, scars that would take years to fade. Richard Hawthorne remained a man learning, faltering. Eli remained a child fragile in body, still in need of care. And Maya herself remained a woman stitched together by both grief and grace. But tonight, she was free. She was seen. She was no longer just the maid accused of crossing boundaries, no longer the mother haunted by a silent hospital room. She was something simpler and stronger. She was herself. Her fingers tightened gently on the photo and the drawing, one symbol of the past, one of the future. Both held in the present moment, both bound by love. Her lips curved into a small, quiet smile. She whispered aloud, the words clear, steady, meant for Tyler, for Eli, for herself, for anyone who might ever listen. "My world did not become perfect, but it became real." The words lingered in the air, soft yet unshakable, like the echo of a hymn. And as the night wrapped around her, Maya Williams finally allowed herself to rest. Not in the shadow of what she had lost, but in the light of what she had found.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you won't miss what's next.